All right, so like I mentioned before, I do recommend that you have a piece of audio that you follow along with, that you record ahead of time. That way you can time out how your stuff is going to go. Even if you don't use that piece of audio in your final animation, it definitely helps to understand the timing. What you don't want to do is get into it, you start animating a piece, another piece, another piece, and pretty soon you're at 30 seconds, you still have stuff that you need to add. Or you're at 45 seconds and now you have to cut stuff back. If you start off with a piece of audio, you can pretty much sync it out as to how that piece of audio is going to lay out. And then your animations are just lined up to that audio. Okay, so it makes your life a lot easier. And I'm all for that. So I have a piece of audio. A couple semesters ago, we used to do this thing where we would animate to a design rule. And so this one specifically was for hyphens, em-dashes, and en-dashes. So I recorded a script of me just kind of reading through all of these different things. I'm using Audition. That's typically the software I'll use for any kind of major adjustments that I need to do. If I need to lay out a piece of audio, this is where I'm going to do it at. I'm going to import the file or open the file. You just go to File, Open. It accepts MP3s and WAV files. If you're not familiar with them, MP3s are essentially compressed files. They sound great and they're small, but if you save them and save them and save them, eventually they'll start sounding like crap. If we save them as WAV files, those are not compressed. So they're going to be bigger files, but we can save them 1,000 times and they'll still have the same quality. So what I recommend is, as you work on any audio files, at least go into Audition, save them as WAV files so you don't have to worry about if you need to change something or modify it. You can just get right into a non-compressed version. All right, so here is the audio. I'll hit play and see what we get. Wonderful. If for some reason you don't hear the audio in yours, sometimes it happens, especially when you start playing with, my laptop has a headphone jack and it has speakers, the same thing with your computers. Under Edit, under Preferences, under Audio Hardware, you just specify what your input is. So in this case, my input is my internal mic. I'm not actually recording anything right now, so through Audition, so it's fine. My default output is going to be my headphones. Okay, so just stuff to be aware of. My home computer, I have a HDMI cable plugged in that goes to my monitor, and so sometimes it'll read that as my output. I don't have any speakers on that, so I have to make sure that if I want to hear something through this, that it's set up correctly. And the same thing with After Effects. All right, so what I have is all of these things are different clips basically that I've laid out. At the very top here, this is how many seconds long this is, so this is 60 seconds almost. Each one of these little phrases that I have is essentially like one thought chunk. As I get into it, I may want to break those up into further ones. I may want to add space between them. I may want to change the pacing of all my animation. So let's listen to a piece of this and then we'll kind of dissect it.
Hyphens, en-dashes, and em-dashes are frequently used punctuation marks that are just as frequently misunderstood.
Okay, so that's one thought bubble. Now the process for that is, as I'm saying those words, I need to have something happening on the screen that makes sense so that the viewer can connect what they're hearing and what they're seeing, okay? Now if you don't have audio at all, there has to be something there that shows them these kinds of things that are happening, and they have to be even more vivid and more specific. Now where it says hyphens, en-dashes, and em-dashes, typically it's a good time for this kind of animation to just write those words out on the screen. And they could be typed out, they could be scaled out, they could slide in, they could just appear however I wanted to animate them. But that right there, that is one thought. And that is about 7 seconds long. Right there's my 7 seconds. So you can see how even though that's a short sentence, that's 7 seconds, we have 30 seconds total that we're dealing with.
All three marks are essentially horizontal lines, though their lengths vary as do occasionally their designs.
Okay, so a couple things. One, let's say that I didn't want to include this other part.
Though their lengths vary as do occasionally their designs.
Okay, if I don't want that part, I can just highlight that. And this is why Audition is so much nicer than After Effects. With After Effects, anytime I want to cut the audio up, I end up with a second layer and a third layer and a fourth layer. And here I have one area that I'm just cutting and stretching and moving and tweaking things, okay? So if I don't want a specific area, like this area, maybe that's not needed for my whole thing, I can just highlight it and then hit the delete key. And now that area is gone, and then I can see how that's going to flow from one spot to the next.
Misunderstood. All three marks are essentially horizontal lines.
Okay, so that doesn't make sense because it needs the other part, but let's pretend it didn't, okay?
Using one instead of the other would be as grammatically wrong as using a question mark in place of a comma.
Okay, let's say in this spot that I needed to add a little bit more time because I didn't like how quickly it's going to pick up to the next one.
Place of a comma. The M dash is the longest. Place of a comma.
Actually, that's a little bit too much time. So if it's too much time, I'm just going to highlight it and delete, and that gets rid of stuff. If I need to add time, this is probably too long also. If I need to add time, I can simply go into the middle here and then just say insert, where is insert? Clip, effects. I'm in 2019, and they may have moved stuff around. Clip, no. I'm pretty sure it was under edit. Mix paste, yes, 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 no, no, no.
I think it is in edits.
Yeah, that's what I thought too, right?
All the way down. I mean, I'm only seeing it.
Oh, insert, there we go. Whew. There it is, insert silence. So then what I can do is insert exactly how many seconds of silence I want there. And the purpose for that is, let's say I'm reading it, and typically when I talk in lecture form, I kind of go quicker because I want to get this lecture as short as possible without droning on too much. When I'm reading stuff, sometimes that carries over, and I may blend my sentences together too quickly, and I need just to be able to have more of a space there. So I'm going to put in, let's say, 1 second, 1, 0, 0. Okay. Now you'll notice in this, this is not 1 second. This is actually like a minute. So let's undo that, and let's go to insert again. Insert silence, and I will say 1. There we go. And that inserted 1 second into the mix here. And then if I needed to, I could cut that down or whatever.
The M dash is the longest.
All right. If I find, this is a clean version too, by the way. Typically when I do any kind of recording, there's a lot of and clearing throats and adjusting. I may say a sentence 3, 4, 5, 6 times. And I go through and I cut out all the bad ones and piece together all the ones that do work. So this is actually a condensed version of the final recording. So this is the process for it, just kind of going through and laying these things out. If there's something that I want to move,
the N dash is used to indicate a span of time or range.
okay.
The M dash is used.
All right, so this is talking about the M dash here. This is talking about the N dash. So let's say I want to take the N dash and talk about that part first. I would just Control X to cut it, put my cursor before this, Control V to paste it, and now I've shuffled that over to the other side. Okay, it's literally that easy to move stuff around in here. You can get into further stuff, and I'm not going to get into it in here, but there's also a thing called a multi-track, and I'll just leave the settings as is. Oops, maybe I won't. Untitled session 2. There we go. And what this allows you to do is drop in other pieces of audio. So let's say that I had myself talking and somebody else, and I wanted to sync up these two conversations going back and forth. I could have my audio track here, their audio track there, and I could cut and paste different pieces inside there and move around how this conversation happens. When they do stuff for, let's say, Toy Story or Shrek or any of those, they're using, not this exact system, but they're using a system very similar to this, so they can sync up how each one of these pieces are going to work. And then they can still go through and tweak the volumes of each one, the fade in, fade out, and all that. So I don't need to go for this one, but just so you're aware that that is a thing. You also may want to bring in a piece of music. So I think I have some music inside of my Angry Bird audio. That one, maybe. Oh, that's my ice. It's in my other Angry Bird one, which is here, here, there, there, there. we'll just pretend it's this one. I thought I had the other one there. If I wanted to fade audio in, fade audio out, in After Effects, we would insert keyframes. We would take the levels down, take the levels up, and that's how we would be able to do it. In here, they just have this fade in and this fade out. You simply drag it, and there's a fade out. And I can control how that fades out or in based off of this. This is just like our speed graph. If you wanted something to be like very quickly drop off or very slowly drop off, we can do that. Okay, so you can fade out and you can fade in. Okay, and what's cool about it, I can drag it pretty much to like there and then to like here. And then this kind of thing, if we had a bigger animation, this would actually sound like someone's approaching us and then walking away. All right, so now they're closer to us. Now they're walking away. Right? So that wouldn't be terribly difficult to do in After Effects, but you can see how much more interactive it is here where we're just focusing on those specific effects and those specific sounds. Back to this. If for some reason you wanted to use your audio, but you wanted to change how your audio sounded, there's a bunch of effects in here that you could play with. I am definitely not a master of audio stuff, but I do know a couple of the things that typically people would use, like pitch bender. Oh, not pitch bender, pitch shifter. I always go the wrong one every single time. Where'd you go? Pitch shifter. There we go. So if I play this by default, let me reset this back to the defaults. It's close enough. There we go.
Hyphens, endashes, and
So that's my regular voice. And then if I take the pitch down,
just as frequently
right, too low.
Using one instead of the other would be as grammatically wrong as using a question mark in place of a comma. The M dash is the longest, followed by the N dash.
Okay, so you can tweak it a little bit. If you go too much, obviously it sounds ridiculous. I could pitch it up higher and it sounds more like a squirrel. They also have noise reduction. So if you were to record something at home and there's a lot of hissing and popping and noise in the background, you can do a noise reduction. Oops. There's two of them that you can do, or several of them. One of them is you capture a noise print. So like right here, oops, that's where I inserted my stuff. There we go. It's hard to see, but there's actually like noise there. There's little bits of waveform right there. So I could say effect, noise, capture noise print. Yep. And then I go back to my effect, I go here, and I go to noise reduction process. And what this does is it looks for that pattern of noise throughout my entire audio, and it tries to pull it out. Now, it's not magic. It's not like Photoshop where we can just grab a person and airbrush it out. There is some kind of distortion that could happen depending on what our noise is.
the N dash is
Okay, so then I could play with these and adjust how these are tweaking. If I go too far,
the N dash is
I may sound metallic.
the N dash is
Oops.
the N dash.
I have to zoom out because I've only selected just that small area, and that sounds weird. There we go.
Hyphens, N dashes, and M dashes are frequently used punctuation marks that are just as frequent.
In this case, there's not a huge difference.
All three marks are essentially horizontal
If you
lines.
tweak it too much, it will sound tinny, where it sounds like you're talking into a metal can or something. There's also denoise, adaptive noise reduction, adaptive click remover, dehummer. So if you do have like, let's say I recorded this in my kitchen and my refrigerator's on in the background and there's a humming sound, it would actually remove or try to remove that humming sound in the background. Typically, if you record something that you're going to use, you want to be in a somewhat quiet, closed-in environment. If you have padding on the walls or something, that definitely helps because that reduces any echo or vibration you might get. That's why we have the sound booth in the other room. There's other stuff you could do too. Where's my other one? Vocal enhancer.
Using one instead of the other would be as grammatically wrong as
So you can see the modification here.
of a comma. The M dash is the longest, followed by the N dash.
And all these are doing is just tweaking how that audio is coming through as to what we want to adjust. There's a lot more stuff. You could definitely play with this. It really depends on what you're trying to do specifically. So that would be the process for once you get a piece of audio recorded, bring it into Audition, chop it up, make sure that you have roughly 30 seconds inside here. Keeping in mind that you have to have something at the end where you're probably not going to be talking, where you'll have just the banner there, okay, where it says, don't drink and drive. And that'll be on screen for 2-3 seconds. That's pretty good there. And then when you're done with it, you would just go to Save As. It should recognize the sample settings you brought in. Anytime I record audio for this kind of thing, typically I'll do it as a mono, meaning that there's only one channel. There's not left speaker and right speaker, because then that's just extra information I don't need. And I'll typically record it at 48,000 hertz. That's plenty of information for me to record. The lower this 48,000 hertz is, the worse the quality is. So if I went to 4,000 or 8,000, it would sound pretty horrible. It would sound very 8-bit or something. Put it in my folder, hit OK. And then that's what I would go into After Effects. And then I would go and find my social awareness, go to my audio, go to my final recording. I would make my new composition, 960 by 540, 30 frames per second, 30 seconds long. It's weird, right? It's the fastest I've ever created something in After Effects. Let's go to clear our disk cache. There we go. And then I would drop down my audio, and then from here, it's simply a matter of timing out where all my animations are coming in. So the illustrations I drew, I bring those in, and I set them up, and I do my animation on it. Depending on how you'll be animating your stuff, it may make sense to have everything in one composition and just animate it all like here, and then here, and then here, and then all the way down the row. You may have several pieces of animation that just kind of come in and go out. So if I had my title sequence, let's say I'm doing drunk driving. I do a car scene. So the car scene comes in, it does its thing, and then it goes out. That might make sense to have just that car scene in its own composition, and then just move it into the screen and then move it out of the screen, right? Or transition from one screen to the next. If I have something that is more reliant on a transition where they're interactive, then I can't do that. 1900 done. So for like this one, you can see that we have the coffee that gets spelled out, and then the bean is interacting with the coffee and making it disappear. So those two are going to be in that same composition. And then because the earth is right behind it, most likely the earth is also in that same composition. And then the bean's obviously here, spelling that out. There's that bean again, there's those. Now she could have done this several different ways. There's no one specific way. So you really have to kind of figure out how you want to do yours to get it to be laid out in that way, in that fashion, okay? And just for fun, let's open that up and see. Open with 2018. Let's save. Don't save that. Yes. All right, so here is her final composition. You can see she has a mix of pieces of artwork. So here's right bean, left bean, right bean, left bean. And then here are some whooshing audio effects. That's what those are. And then down here, these are all her compositions. So here's a composition of this thing happening. Here's a composition of this thing happening. And you can see right at the end how it just disappears, and that's where those beans would come in and then it would cut out. There's the animation of that. So you see how it's pretty much modular. Once you have the artwork in there, and you just start laying out what you want all these things to look like, it becomes much simpler. Don't think of it as like one huge project. Think of it as a bunch of small projects coming together. See, all these are just tiny animations. There's that one. And then in this final comp, that's where everything is going to start blending together. So here's the coffee, and then there's the bean coming in to cover it up. And then there's that animation, there's that animation, there's the bean covering it up and showing the next animation, okay? So there's no one specific way to do it. Really, as long as it works out, it looks good, then it doesn't matter how specifically you did it. Just keep those things in mind. Obviously, we want motion blur on these. We want our graphics and images to look nice and crisp. We want the story to be told nice. Think about those finishing effects at the end. And that should be it. Questions on that?